Hello everyone, I'm Osma from the National Library of Finland, and yes, I'm one of the developers of Skosmos. And with me today I also have Joeli Takala, who just joined. He will be maybe also answering some questions during the Q&A after the main presentation. So I will go straight into business. This is the first time we are presenting Skosmos 3, so this is really contains lots of new information because we've been working on it for some time, but it has been so far internal development mostly, and now this is first time we are presenting it to a slightly wider group of people. First, what is Skosmos? I will spend a few seconds talking about this because maybe it's not familiar to everyone. Skosmos is a web-based SKOS vocabulary browser and publishing tool. And of course, SKOS is a linked data standard for representing thesauri, subject headings, taxonomies, classifications, lightweight ontologies, and probably many other types of vocabularies that you know better than I do. And Skosmos is a platform for publishing this. And it facilitates subject indexing, information retrieval, vocabulary development, all the kinds of things where you need this controlled vocabulary. It's developed by us, the National Library of Finland, but we have received contributions from many others, and it's an open source system with an MIT license. So it's available for everyone and can be modified and so on. There's basically no, if it breaks, you keep both pieces. So yeah, it's very liberal licensed. The Finto service is basically the main in a way, this is the home, or this is the main use case for Skosmos. So this is, it started as a project 11 years ago, financed by 2 Finnish ministries, and we launched it in 2014. And it became a permanent service 5 years ago. So this is a service and the infrastructure of providing linked data vocabularies for the whole Finnish public sector. So to libraries, museums, and archives, but also some public institutions. So this is what we use Skosmos for in our organization. In a way, it's our own Skosmos installation. And this is how it looks like currently. It's running Skosmos 2, obviously, so this is the place where the National Library of Finland, where we publish thesauri classifications, ontologies, and so on. And it's used by libraries, archives, museums, media, and students, and so on. So if you want to visit, it's at Finto.fi. It's available in 4 languages nowadays, including English. But there are also many others who use Skosmos because we provide it as open source. So here are just a few of them. Maybe the main, or the ones that we are sort of that we want to showcase are the UNESCO thesaurus, obviously by the UNESCO, the cultural organization of the UN, and the AgriVoc thesaurus browser by the FAO, another UN organization. But there are many others like SKOS, ELS thesaurus, Lothair in France, and lots of others. We are trying to keep a list of these on the skosmos.org website. So if you want to take a look, there's a larger list there. So it's quite widely adopted these days, which we are very, very proud of. So how is it built? The architecture? Well, the basic idea is to put all the data, meaning the SKOS vocabularies, in a RDF triple store that has a Sparkle endpoint, like all of them basically have. And usually this triple store is Apache Jena Fuseki, because that's the one we are using and that we are sort of have the best support for. And especially if you have larger vocabularies, you need to enable the text index to get efficient text searches. It's possible to do without, but then it's slower. Then there's some backend code written in PHP. And the backend generates web pages for humans, or browsers used by humans, but also for search engines, for example. and other kinds of robots. It also provides RDF link data, and it has a REST API so that you can integrate this with other systems. And then there's the front end, also sort of, I mean, the backend generates the front end in a way, but it also, the front end itself has some client-side dynamic functionality, like, well, all the things you expect nowadays on a web page. For example, when you type a search, there's some autocomplete there. Skosmos is quite traditional in the sense that it's a web application where most of the content on the web pages are generated on the server side. So it's not a single page application like modern web applications often are. And well, it has some implications, good upsides and downsides, but that's how it is, and that's not changing in Skosmos 3. Here's some history. So we can trace back the history of the code base to 2011, because then the development of what was then called Onki Lite started at the Semantic Computing Research Group. This is a university research group at the Aalto University and the University of Helsinki. I was working there at the time and did my PhD studies. But that was like the start of this code base. But at that research group, previously there were some other systems called Onki, versions 1, 2, and 3, that were developed there earlier. So in a way, this was an re-implementation of the ideas behind Onki. And the first publication was 2012. It was called Onki Lite on Sparkle at the ECO conference. And in 2013, the maintenance of this was handed over to the National Library of Finland. The idea being that the Onki service that had been created at the research group should become this kind of a national level service, and then that couldn't be run by a research group anymore, so it was transferred to the National Library of Finland. And the next year, 2014, we've launched the Finto service and renamed the software to Skosmos. And the code, which used to be on Google Code, I don't know if anyone remembers it anymore. It's been shut down for many years now, but the code was moved to GitHub. And yeah, then we released 1.0 and started the Skosmos users group, and then 2018 released Skosmos 2.0 that had some new features, and 2 years ago we started planning for Skosmos 3, and we created a new visual design for it, even though we didn't yet have any new code. And then beginning of last year we started actual development. Right, and of course one question is, why do we want to make a new major version? What's wrong with the old one? And I think the first two items here are the most important. So the many of the components we used in the Skosmos 2, especially on the user interface, they were JavaScript libraries that worked fine at the time when we started using them, but then they were abandoned by the creators, and not very well maintained. And of course, with this kind of lack of maintenance, there's all kinds of problems like security issues starting to build up, and all kinds of bit rot, and maybe compatibility problems with modern browsers, and all kinds of problems like this. So we needed to find a way to replace them. We can't use the old components anymore. And the second reason was that while the back end of Skosmos, we were quite happy with that, but the front end was kind of built organically over the years by many different authors, and it became quite messy. And one, but not the only reason for this was that it was based on the jQuery library, which is it's a very nice JavaScript library for making this kind of dynamic features into a web page, but it doesn't really provide like a solid framework for making a full application. So the code ends up being this kind of a messy spaghetti. So yeah, we were not happy with that, how that ended up, and cleaning it up is like basically means rewriting. So yeah, so changing these two things in practice meant that we have to rewrite the front end. And of course, if we are going to do that, then it makes sense to also think about other things that could be improved. And we figure out that, for example, we want to reduce the dependencies. We don't want to depend on that many libraries because of the obvious risks of them being abandoned or other problems. And then we could also, if we do a rewrite, we can improve the code quality, for example, by adopting new tools and processes to better control the quality. We could introduce automated front-end testing. Previously we only had back-end tests, and then we could, of course, generally improve the user experience and accessibility and all these kind of nice things. If we're going to redo it, we can learn from the past mistakes. So with that, let's move into the changes. So what are we changing in Skosmos 3? The overview here is, first of all, the new visual style. It looks very different from the old one, or quite different. We re-implemented the front end. We did spend quite some time figuring out the alternatives, but ended up choosing to use the Vue.js library for the front-end components. And also small changes and improvements to the PHP backend, but mostly we're just keeping it as it is. And then some changes also to the localization. So we decided to switch some of the tools in that. So using Symfony translations and the localize. I'll talk more about that in a moment. What hasn't changed? Basically, the core functionality from a user perspective, it should remain about the same. So we are quite happy with the feature set and the sort of the basic interaction patterns. So how to browse a vocabulary, how to search, and so on. We're not changing that, even though we have to re-implement many things. We're basically re-implementing them in pretty much the same way as they were. And the general architecture remains the same. So we're still basing it on a triple store. We'll still have the PHP backend. Also, the sort of the division of labor between the backend and the front end remains pretty much the same. So we're not making it anything like a single page application, even though there's maybe a bit more focus on the front end. So some things that used to be in the back end are moving to the front end, but it's pretty minor. About the visual style, so again, we contracted the same company that did the old design also for the new design, because we were quite happy with their work. So that the new visual style looks like this here, and it was designed by Hahmo Design. So it's a very small design company in Helsinki. And they also made us a logo, which we didn't have before. So previously Skosmos, we had a logo for Finto, but not for Skosmos. But now we have one for Skosmos as well, and also in different variations. And yeah, there's more of the visual style coming up, but right now I could show you a little demo. So this is I'll go to the front page. This is how it looks currently. So this is an installation that's always tracking the current development version. So every time we do a change into and integrate it to the main branch, then in a minute or two it will show up here. So this is the front page. It's maybe missing a few things here, but if we go to a vocabulary, this is the general Finnish ontology. I'll switch the language to English. And this is the front page of the vocabulary with alphabetical display. And also we can look at the hierarchy instead if we want to. And then there's a search box. So we can search for example, thesauri, and then go to the concept of thesauri here. And there is this key value or property value style display of the information about this concept. There are the terms in other languages, and the URI. It's possible to download the data, and then we have this separate section with mappings to other vocabularies. For example, the link to the Library of Congress subject headings that we have in this general Finnish ontology for most or around half of the concepts. And yeah, if we want to change the language, it's quite easy. So this is the same information in Finnish or in Northern Sami, which is a new addition or recent addition to the vocabulary. But this changes only the language of the information coming from the vocabulary, so the content language. But separate from that, we can also switch the language of the user interface elements. So right now I have the properties in Finnish, but the values in English. So these two are like two separate settings. The user interface language, which is up here, and the content language that can be selected from here. We can also take a look at the public library classification system. This is a decimal classification. It's heavily based on the Dewey classification, but this is the one that is used in Finnish public libraries. And as you can see, it also has a hierarchy here, and but this time with it comes with the numbers, with the notation codes, so we can open up branches of the hierarchy here and see also the numbers here. And if we open a particular concept, then we can also see all the links to the other classes come with the notation codes or class numbers as well. And then there's also here a link to another classification system that is used by the Helsinki City Library. They want to be a bit different, so they have their own. What else? There's also an alphabetical display here, and now since we are in a decimal classifications, we can also show the notation codes here, all the class numbers here in the alphabetical display. And all of this that I've shown is, if you're familiar with Skosmos, then this is just basic functionality that every Skosmos, also in Skosmos too. So there is basically nothing much new apart from the new visuals. It looks a bit different, but all the functionality is basically pretty much identical to the old one. And that's how we want it to be. But of course, this would be an opportunity to change something if we really wanted to, but so far the changes are quite minor. Okay, getting back to my, and if you want to take a look yourself, this is the address that I was just showing you, test.dev.finto.fi. So this is our test installation, like I said, and it's always tracking the main branch, and it has a bunch of test vocabularies there. Basically the ones that we have in Finto as well. Okay, then moving on to some of the details. So first of all, the changes on the front end side. So the JavaScript framework, like I said, Skosmos 2 was based mainly on jQuery, and now we are switching to Vue version 3. The CSS framework remains the same. It's Bootstrap 5. We use that to bootstrap the styles and then build on top of that. For internationalization, we use jQuery i18n, and now we use the corresponding Vue library, Vue extension. For dependency management, in Skosmos 2, we were able to use Composer, which is basically actually a PHP dependency management tool, but it's also possible to manage front-end dependencies like JavaScript libraries with some limits, but it's possible. But for Skosmos 3, we just went for NPM, which is more focused on JavaScript things, obviously. The search component in Skosmos 2, we use type-ahead from Twitter. Well, Twitter doesn't exist with that name anymore, and they abandoned this library long ago, so we can't use that. Well, we are still using it, but it's problematic. So with Skosmos 3, we couldn't find an equivalent component that would work for us, so we just re-implemented the whole thing making a custom Vue component. And the same with the hierarchy. We were using JS3, which is not very well maintained these days, and we have instead re-implemented it in Vue ourselves. The old one didn't have any front-end tests and didn't do any checks on the JavaScript style. but now we are using Cypress to test the front end to exercise all the, like basically it's simulating a user interaction and testing that everything is in place and works as it should. And we use standard JS to control the JavaScript code, so it follows specific conventions. On the backend side, again, the framework hasn't changed. We don't use a specific PHP framework, although we do borrow things from Symfony a little bit. But the main framework is our own custom MVC style model view controller. We didn't want to adopt a specific framework because then we would sort of be dependent on that and how they change over time, and it's we're keeping it simple instead. Templating, we still use Twig, we just upgraded to the new version. For RDF handling, we use EasyRDF as before. For internationalization, we have been using the traditional getText functionality in PHP, which is very, very traditional. It comes from, I don't know, decades ago, GNU operating systems. And it works quite well, but it's a little clunky to work with. So for Skosmos 3, we're switching to Symfony translations, which is like a component of the Symfony framework. For dependency management, we're still using Composer. For unit tests, we're still using PHP unit. We are using PHP CS fixer to control the code style so that it follows the recommendations. And of course, we're targeting newer PHP versions. With old Skosmos, we're basically stuck on these two versions. We can't upgrade because of some of the libraries, what they require. But with Skosmos 3, we are currently supporting these 8.1, 8.2, and 8.3. And but as we go on, we probably are going to shift this window. Okay. A little bit about localization, because I think that's important for many. Skosmos, we have been maintaining the languages, the user interface languages that we need for Finto. So basically that means English, Finnish, Swedish, and Northern Sami these days as well. But quite a few other languages have been contributed. We have been using the Transifex platform so far, which allows for crowdsourcing the translation work. And I know there are some translators present today, so thank you for your work. You can see here an overview of the languages and how complete the translations are. Some of them are lagging a bit behind. And then there's some that are a bit mystical, like the Chinese simplified translation that's apparently 132% complete, but I wouldn't trust that number. Anyway, for Skosmos 3, we are switching. Transifex has worked reasonably well, but it has its problems, and we wanted to have something that integrates with the Symfony Translate framework that we are using, so we are switching to Localize, which is another platform, and basically, we're allowed to use it for free because we're an open source project. So we are probably going to set up the similar kind of crowdsourcing workflow on Localize, but we just basically started using it last week, so it's early days. Okay, configuration of Skosmos. If you're familiar with how it works in Skosmos 2, there's no big difference. So there's basically just one configuration file in Turtle syntax, and it has a section on global settings, and then many, or depending on how many vocabularies are you, there's just one section per vocabulary with vocabulary specific settings. Of course, there's some new configuration options for new functionality, or like functionality that's slightly different from before. And I think we're probably going to deprecate or remove some of the options closer to the release. But right now we haven't yet done that. So slight changes, but the overall idea remains the same. Styling and customization. So currently we have been working with just a single theme, the one that I showed in the demo. That's like blue and gray, basically, the one here at the top left. And there are we still haven't built the functionality for customization, but what we are aiming for, we would like planning for is to have 4 standard themes to choose from. You can see them here at the top right. So basically the same, but with different color choices. So if you install a new Skosmos, you can choose between these 4, and then of course do your own customization on top of that. And that should be possible to do it with CSS, obviously, but also to, for example, to put some content boxes on the front page, like a welcome box or news feed. And then also the Skosmos 2 has support for plugins that you can use to plug in your own widgets to the user interface. So we would want to have that for Skosmos 3 as well. But yeah, what this means for users of Skosmos 2. So if you have done any visual customizations to make it like match your brand identity better or whatever, basically you will have to re-implement it for Skosmos 3 because all the front-end code, the HTML code and the CSS is very different. So it just can't just copy it over. And also the same applies to the plugins, because if you've done any plugins, they are heavily based on jQuery, but we're not using jQuery in Skosmos 3 anymore. So we have to figure out another way to implement the plugins. Haven't yet started work on that. And so that we will also face this ourselves, obviously. So because when eventually we're going to upgrade the Finto service to Skosmos 3, and we don't want it to look like a generic Skosmos, but there's like a special design for how Finto should look on Skosmos 3, which you can see here at the bottom, and we need to implement that ourselves then on top of the standard Skosmos themes. And also we need to re-implement our own, because we use like half a dozen different plugins on Finto, so we need to re-implement those as well. Okay, a bit about the code base. So Skosmos code lives on GitHub. There's the code repository, and there are 2 important branches. The main branch is basically Skosmos 3, and then we have the Skosmos 2 branch, which is obviously Skosmos 2. So Skosmos 2 is currently in maintenance mode. We do as little changes as possible, but sometimes we do need to fix things, and we actually did a release quite recently because we had some new functionality there. So yeah, if we do changes to Skosmos 2, that will happen on the Skosmos 2 branch, but otherwise we are working on the main branch. This is GitHub, so there are issues and pull requests, and there's also quite a lot of documentation in the wiki. So if you want to take a look, and especially if you want to play around with Skosmos to install it yourself, then you can find the relevant documents in the wiki. About code quality, like I mentioned, so this is something that we are improving in this release. So we are doing automated code quality checks, both for the PHP code and the JavaScript code. And then, well, this isn't new, but we are still using the online quality assurance services like Code Climate Scrutinizer, Sonar Cloud, and probably a bunch of others that I forget. So these are really nice because they are available for open source projects for free. So it's just like you get an extra reviewer to look at all the pull requests, all the code changes, and comment and notice any subtle problems. We also improved the automated tests. So as before, we have a PHP unit test for the backend, but now we also have front-end tests with Cypress, and we have automated all of this so that both of these are run through on the GitHub Actions continuous integration platform. So if you're familiar with that kind of development, this is how it looks, that all the tests are executed on GitHub side every time you make a change. That's kind of a double check. I mean, you're supposed to run as a developer, you're supposed to run the tests every time you change the code, but sometimes you forget. But as a backup, the tests are also run on the GitHub side, and it will complain loudly if something is broken. About how we do development, so most of the work is done in Scrum style sprints. I'm not sure how religiously we are adhering to Scrum, but we have tried to uh, take some advice from there. And in practice, it means that we're scheduling these 2-week sprints every now and then. The sprint is defined as the days from Tuesday to Thursday of those 2 weeks. So it's actually only 6 working days because we need to have also some time for other things that are important. And yeah, so the Mondays and Fridays are for meetings and urgent things unrelated to the sprint. And then also we have a planning meeting before and a review meeting afterwards. We did 5 sprints last year. We've done 5 so far this year, and there's one more coming up in December. So about every other month we do this. And the reason we do this in sprints is that basically all of us are working on many other things as well. So this is not the only thing by far that we are working on and that we are responsible for. But having these sprints allows us to focus on this together and to do things like, well, of course, reviewing each other's code, doing pair programming occasionally, and just generally, well, everybody focuses on the same thing. It's much easier to get work done. And we have a team of developers. So currently that's 4 of us who are doing development. That's Joeli, Mika, myself, and Unni. And then occasionally we've had help from consultants, not this year, I think, but Bruno and Henry have taken part. There's Mikko, who's our product owner, and he's sort of looking after and seeing that it's going in the right direction. And then we have some user representatives, Mirja and Tuomas. They're also working in Finto, and but they are more doing vocabulary development and maintenance. So, but they have a good grasp on how this is used in day-to-day work, so they participate in the reviews and they give feedback for the developers. And we use GitHub issues and project boards for coordinating all of this. So it's yeah, and we're continuously trying to improve our processes. So we also do these after the sprints. We also do these retrospectives where we suggest improvements and give feedback to each other about how the sprint has been working. So okay, about what is still missing or under development in Skosmos 3. Well, on the left side here is this is more feature oriented, so we're still missing the groups tab, the new and deprecated tab. You might have seen those when I did the demo. The tabs were there, but there was nothing behind there. There's also no global search over multiple vocabularies, so you can only search within a single vocabulary at the time currently. Then we know that there are trickier vocabularies, for example, if they have more than one concept scheme or otherwise a complex hierarchy. We know that they are not, all of them are not working well yet, so this is something we need to improve. And also the internationalization is lacking, so especially the front end, the view components we're currently in this, we actually have a sprint going on currently, and this is one of the items we are trying to fix in this sprint, but right now it's not working. So the view, some of the view components are only the texts are only in English at the moment. Then on the sort of the visual side, there's like I mentioned, we still don't have the themes. We still don't have an option of customization through CSS, well, at least not in an easy way. No support for this kind of content boxes. So if you want to place a welcome text or a news feed on the landing page, we would like to make it easy to do so, but it's not yet there. Plugin support is missing, and we're also planning for a mobile layout, but we haven't really started on that. So, and of course, all the time when you do development, there's lots of small details to fix, tweaks and improvements. Roadmap, no specific dates here, as you see. It really depends on when we think it's ready, and it's hard to give estimates, especially when we have other priorities as well in the group. But the basic idea is to at some point when we're happy enough, we will release 3.0 with what we think of as the core functionality implemented, so that it's actually a usable thing and not like missing obvious things. But it might not be everything that I just showed you. It's probably, it's likely that some features are missing that we would really like to have there. So then we will build on that with more functionality, and of course we will need to customize it for ourselves so that we are able to actually use it in Finto. So something like the 3.1 release or possibly 3.2 could be the one that we actually upgrade to in the Finto service. So yeah, we're not going straight to 3.0 in Finto because it's probably easier to do it this way, like gradually building it up until we are finished with, or happy with it, so that it's good enough for Finto. But this means that if you want to test it out, of course it's possible to test it out already now. All the code is there in the main branch. But if you prefer to wait for a bit of a more formal release, then maybe 3.0 would be a good starting point for getting used to the new version. And then maybe 3.1 to actually deploying it for any kind of real use. That's it, what I had as slides, but yeah, I'm happy to take any questions and comments.